Hi everyone, thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where we focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable effective and sustainable change adoption, including communication, leadership, training, change practice, process design, change capability, and much more. My name is Juma, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is the author, creative consultant, and artist, Noah Scalin. Noah is an advocate for the power of creativity in the workplace to help solve business, current problems, and manage change. I'm grateful to have Noah sharing his passion and thoughts with me today. So Noah, thank you so much, and thank you for joining the Inner Game of Change podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I am very excited to have you today.
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, to start with, today we would like to cover a lot around the topic of creativity and collaboration. And I know you're an expert in the area. I know that you're a creative artist. You also describe yourself as an activist, which probably I'll get you for another podcast to talk more about that one. But first, do you want to share with our listeners something about yourself, Noah?
Sure. So as you said, I'm an artist, and I'm also a consultant who teaches about creativity and innovation in the business space. I am the partner in a business called Another Limited Rebellion that I run with my sister, who's my business partner. And we work with companies, mostly large, some small, but all over the world, doing this work that is based on what we learned as artists.
So you work a lot in a corporate setting and with corporate leaders and businesses, which is why I'm very excited to have you here, because it sounds like you've created a bridge between art and a corporate setting.
Yeah, I think we're fairly unique in that space. There's been, I think, some headway in the last several years around design thinking and that sort of element being brought into the business space. But I think for a long time, art has been seen as almost like the opposite of business in many ways, and has been treated as such, as sort of two very separate entities. And what we just discovered in our own work was that there's a great need for the skills that artists have developed, and they're transferable skills, and they're the skills of the 21st century, really, especially for leadership.
Right. You promote the notion that creativity is not a talent, it's more of a practice.
Yeah. That's, it's a phrase we developed because it was something we learned ourselves. I think that for a lot of people, creativity and I think we have sort of cultural mythology about it, societal mythology about it, but that creativity is sort of reserved for certain special people. And those people sort of are raised up. And we think of those, when we think of great innovators, great creatives, there's some individuals we think of. And so it tends to be in our education systems that we support that notion by sort of letting people dabble in creative stuff. And if it doesn't stick, then they can kind of let it go and focus on the more important, in America, we call it STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. That's the big focus, right? That's the important stuff. That's the stuff that's going to get you places, and really pulled back on the education around creativity. So you might have an art class, but a lot of times that's brief or optional or canceled if people have tight budgets. Yeah. And so a lot of people embrace that for themselves and go, I'm not creative, or I'm not a creative person, or I don't feel like I can do creative work. And so they've really let go of that aspect of themselves. And what we want to say is that, first of all, we know for a fact that creativity is an essential human trait, and we've got evidence of it from prehistory on to the present day, and that it is something really special and unique to humans that is useful for all the stuff that we're dealing with, especially in this current moment around all the change that's happening and all the change that will be happening. And so, how do you problem solve? How do you deal with the unexpected? How do you come up with new ideas? How do you do all this stuff? Well, that set of skills is all based in creativity. And if you've not been developing that or not believing you have it, it can be very hard to approach those challenges. And so we want to have a simple way forward, which is why we talk about creative practice, because we treat it like you would treat any other thing that is a skill, which is you practice it and get better at it. If it's a talent, you got it or you don't. And that's, what are you going to do about that? Like, if you don't have that set of that talent to do it, you're in trouble. But we know that that's not the case, that every single person in an organization can develop their creativity and serve the purpose of creating better.
So each one of us has got a level of creativity where you're trying to do it through the practice is actually bring it up to the surface. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What we always say is that, we think of it as like a muscle that, you develop your muscles. And so, yeah, if you feel creative already, awesome, but you can always be more. And if you're not feeling creative, no problem. You've got a creative spark within you. We just have to grow it and show it, as you're saying, like show it out to the world. And so even myself, who's my sister and I both are artists, our parents are artists. We've grown up in a very supportive environment around our creativity. But I burned out after working professionally for a dozen years. I worked for other people and then run my own business. And I just lost my creativity. And when I did, that was when I had to learn how it worked, because I also subscribed to the idea that it was maybe just something special I had, because that's how everyone treated me. Like, oh, I'm the special creative guy. Yes. And so I kind of embraced that too. But when it was gone, what do you do? I mean, if you're the special creative guy and you don't feel creative or you don't feel inspired, I had to figure out where to get it from too. So learning that allowed me to teach other people how to find that within themselves.
Great. Now, I would like you to share how you approach a business and what your value proposition would be.
Yeah, we really often come in through leadership development and also, organizational change. There's a bunch of sort of different ways in that we meet with organizations, but it really is this idea of when an organization is identifying that they're struggling with dealing with whatever it is, we did that term, VUCA, is that a term that gets used in your world
volatility,
as well?
Uncertainty,
complexity, and what's the last one? VUCA. Now we're stuck.
Leave it. We'll come back to it. Yes.
We'll come. Yeah. That's the worst, is not being able to remember it on the spot. But this sort of all these challenges, organizations that are saying, we know we are not good at dealing with these things. We're not good at problem solving. We're not good at innovating. We're stuck. We see where we need to be, but we can't figure out how to get there. Our leaders do great when they're given a very linear set of tasks, when they get from A to B, but when they're offered a new challenge and they can't solve it, that's where we can help, because we can really get everyone up to the set of speed in terms of a set of skills that's going to let them do much better with problem solving, much better with innovating, much better with dealing with the unexpected, which obviously, especially with COVID, but that was our point. We had been doing this for years before COVID. And then of course, when that hit and everyone went into lockdown, we got so many people reaching out to us saying, look, you guys, we need this stuff you do so much now. We get it that you came and talked to us last year, but it didn't quite make sense to us as much as it does now. And I was like, exactly. That's why we've been teaching. We wanted you to be ready for this type of experience where you suddenly had to change your entire workflow, where you had to go from, everyone working in an office building to everyone working from home. That's a massive change. That's a huge problem to deal with. And if you got creative skills developed, you can handle it and thrive through it.
Yeah. So what I hear you say is that in time of uncertainty, creativity can be a tool or can be an avenue that businesses can look at to pretty much problem solve.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one great path for it. And it's a pretty valuable one since it's a constant issue. I think, organizations looking to innovate. So uncertainly, absolutely. But also if you're just sort of your task is to continue to stay relevant, that's another piece of it, right? Because a lot of places find their way, get their big idea, monetize it, roll forward, and then they got nothing else.
Yes.
And so if you're not constantly innovating, you're not constantly being prepared for the next thing that happens, then there will be another organization, another business comes up and usurps you. You can see that with all kinds of things that are happening right now.
Yes. So my understanding is that creativity happens, innovation happens as a result of creative work. Is that right?
That is a great way to put it. Yes, absolutely. I think, and that, that's important to bring up, because a lot of times what we experience is people talking about innovation and how important it is. And it's, the buzzword, and every organization has prioritized it. But when we talk about, well, where does it come from? We say, look, we break it down when we're working with people that creativity is the fertile soil in which these ideas are planted and they grow into innovations. If you don't have a creative culture, if you haven't developed that, you can have all the ideas in the world, but you're not going to end up with innovations. You're going to end up with frustrated people who are sort of shutting each other down, not, trying weird things out that allows them to then come up with that great new idea. And so, yeah, it is foundational. And so every organization saying we need innovation needs to prioritize creativity. But as much as innovation is embraced, creativity is, unless you are identified as a creative person or a creative department, or maybe if you're lucky in a creative business, but even those businesses that are sort of identified as creative don't necessarily treat every employee as somebody who has that capacity within the organization. Yes. And that's where we're really coming in as saying, yes, everyone needs this.
Yes. So now when you approach a business, what would be the attitude? Some of them will be kind of uncertain or unsure about what you're going to bring about. Some of them saying, when is now going to finish because we need to go to a meeting. And
right.
You would have seen
that's a polite way of saying that they've got their arms crossed looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I will address that frequently, like, why did they let this crazy person in? Luckily, I will say that even if we start with arms crossed, I've never encountered them still being crossed at the end of when we work with people. Yes. And I think that's because, why are people like that? Well, because everyone's got it. There's a deadline, there's a budget, there's numbers we got to meet. And to say, oh, well, let's talk about this weird creativity thing that's so amorphous and doesn't fit in our bottom line, that's not always appealing. But luckily, because we're often coming in through the leadership lens, they know they're supposed to be there. People want them in that room. It's been told that this is important, so they're at least willing to give me some attention, or my sister. And when we present this information as artists, it's so unusual. It's so different. It's not a PowerPoint like you've ever seen. It's not a bar graph and a pie chart. It's weird stuff. And that allows us to get underneath people's walls that they put up around this stuff. I don't want to, I've heard all this before. I've read these books. It's so unusual that people pay attention, and now we've got access to their brains and we can actually tell them something that might wake them up and allow them to start seeing themselves differently, their world differently, their organization differently. And so it's a really exciting job. I love doing this job because I get to see so many people have the light bulbs turned on in their head, and just in a room within an hour, I can see people just go, oh, this word I've heard, this phrase, this term, I finally get it. I finally understand what you're talking about with collaboration, or why that's important, or with, we talk about perfectionism and getting away from that. We talk about all these different principles around sort of the mindset. And it's amazing to see people like just let go of this thing they've been holding on to, these belief systems for, decades often. And you can see that they're going to approach their work differently from that moment forward. So it's a pretty amazing and pretty satisfying experience. But I've had plenty of people who at the beginning were like, I don't get why you are here. And I am going to speak up about this. And if I can get them to just keep listening, usually those are my biggest supporters afterwards.
Have you noticed a shift over the last couple of years because of the disruption we are in now? Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing this work for over a decade now. And in that time, I've seen a pretty big transformation. Like, we were pretty radical when we talked about this 10 years ago. Yeah. And it's become not mainstream, but certainly something that is way more common to hear about and way more likely for people to at least be open to. And obviously, with lockdown, with COVID, like that, we got immediately a bunch of calls from people saying, that thing you do, we need it right now. Like, please bring this back around. Like, this is exactly the thing we're looking for. This is the time for it, which is true. That's why we've been teaching this is like, we wanted you to be ready for this specific kind of thing that we couldn't plan for. Don't wait for the next big one to start working on it, because it's coming. Yeah. There is another, there'll be more. We won't know what it is. But even as an organization, we ourselves have to change. We were used to doing in-person workshops, I do keynote speaking all the time, and had to switch immediately. I'd never done a virtual talk. I'd never done a virtual workshop before last year. And so we changed all of our workflow over to virtual, and we ended up learning a ton of new stuff having a whole new way of working, innovations for ourselves. And that's what we discovered is that there, these kinds of transformations are full of potential and possibility if you embrace them as such. And that's exactly what we teach other people.
Yep. So there's something that somebody told me maybe 25 years ago, or maybe I read it somewhere, that the unknown could be far more exciting than the known. And the idea is that we already know what the known is. In fact, I actually read about King Arthur when he sent the knights looking, for the Holy Grail. And then they got out in the forest, and then they decided which part of the forest they're going to go through. And then they decided they're going to go through the part that is least known to them. And so the idea is that only through going through something that you're not familiar with, you won't have the opportunity to understand more things and different ways of working or thinking. And there's always an opportunity in the unknown. Is that your mindset, and is that what you're trying to help businesses with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about the fact that you're not going to find the new idea in the familiar. You're not going to find it looking at the things you always look at or doing the things you always do and doing them the way you always do them. And so you have to have the unexpected. You have to have the unknown. And that's hard because business doesn't like it.
Sure.
It is not, it's not safe. It's not a guarantee of the bottom line. And so
it's
you have to, go ahead. What were you saying?
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. Like, who doesn't want to sit in you want to be in your comfortable chair that you sit in all the time, but you're not going to get the new idea there. And so if your task is to come up with the new idea, is to solve the new problem, then you have to make times where that's okay. And so when we talk about creating a creative culture, cultivating this space, it's creating a brave space where you can take risks. We don't want you to take those risks with the public. We don't want it to be at the end of your process and be like, let's now try something crazy. And I'll often say that when I'm teaching, I'm not teaching you how to run a business. I'm teaching you how to be creative. And you have to do that in parallel with running your business. If you don't do both, right, you're going to have a problem on either end. So this happens at the same time. And if you do this work, you're going to be better at what you do. You're going to increase your capacity. You're going to create better product. You're going to do things more efficiently, and you're going to get a better result. So this is a building thing that happens over time. But the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be, because this isn't like change doesn't happen instantly. It's incrementally over time.
Sure. Yes. And change is uncomfortable anyway. So,
oh, yes.
Yeah. So when you go to a business, you've actually got two problems, or two challenges, I should say. One is to create a collaborative environment. And the second piece is to get them into a creative mode. Have I got this close to right?
Yeah, I haven't approached it that specific way, but I agree with both of those points. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just high level. Do you want to share with us an example of a business that you dealt with and you think that you left them with worthwhile exercise and frame of work to apply?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, one of my favorite things is when we get people from across an organization, so from different silos, because frequently the issue is that we'll be educating only one group of people that are already within one silo. And so they're all used to talking to each other, working with each other, or supporting each other, and which is awesome, because often they are still focused on their own success. And I think that is a big problem with, organizational culture, is it may talk about this stuff and say it's important, say creativity is important or collaboration is important, but they don't prioritize it in terms of how they reward people. And what we know about culture is that people are going to follow what they observe happening, which is who's getting a raise, who's getting promoted, who's getting the back pats. And that's all that's going to matter. It doesn't matter what you say in your beautiful mission and vision statement. It's how do you act and what are people perceiving? So on the one hand, awesome, loves to teach those groups. But when we get people from a variety of departments or a variety of tiers, and we're able to make them do activities together, there's an immediate opportunity to say, wow, we've made a mistake not bringing these other voices into our conversations, believing that I'm the expert, so I don't want to hear from somebody who's not already an expert. But the reality is you have a room full of expert engineers, and they're not solving the problem in a new way because they all agree this is the best way to do it. And they'll never try some weird way that maybe somebody else who from a totally unrelated department would say, well, why wouldn't you do that? They're like, well, it's never been done in history. And they're like, yeah, but let's try it, right? I mean, that mindset, when we set up our workshops and our activities, it's having people try to do things that they're not used to doing with people they're not used to working with, creating that communication and collaboration very quickly, solving problems very quickly and iteratively very quickly. And it's immediately transferable. Like they can see, and we all, what we do is our process specifically is a little different than a lot of people encounter, but it's related to people who do lean or agile or even design thinking. But where we sort of change things up a little is we start with action. So we say, do something, then we reflect and share, and then we assess and apply. So the do something is where we get people right away doing creative activities. We then have them pause, write about it, share about it. Then we have them assess, what can I do with these skills? And what's great is that we can see in their writing and in their conversation immediately afterwards, they're already like, oh, right, here's how I can do this. I can immediately start asking people for help on a more regular basis. I can share my process quicker, sooner, not keep it to myself. Like there's all these revelations that come from those sessions. And I see it again and again where they're just like, I'm immediately going to be doing things differently by including these other departments in with what we're doing or sharing this stuff out. Or if it's leadership specific, that they're like, oh, I'm going to communicate this better, or I'm going to show it by embracing and embody this stuff and making it clear to everyone that it is acceptable to take these risks because I'm going to do them too. I'm not going to worry about looking foolish. I'm going to put myself out there. And so we provide them with tools that allow that because with creativity and the creative activities we do, they're adjacent to their work rather than like, let's take your existing work and have you do it in a specific way. We have you do something else. So it's lateral thinking and we want you over here. And then after you've done that, when you return to your work, you're going to think about your work and do your work differently.
Yes. And you mentioned the word lateral. I think, and you're probably more familiar with it. My understanding is that the majority of the workplace focus is actually on the convergent thinking. And what you're trying to do is get them over to their divergent thinking, which is the creative side, in the hope that later they will walk away with what we call lateral thinking, which is kind of imbalance between the two. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. That both are useful and both are important.
Of course.
We don't want you to be 100% in one way or the one space or the other. But the only reason generally that we're in one of these spaces working with these teams is because they're stuck doing things a certain way forever. Yeah. And someone has said, it is time to mix things up. We've got to do it differently. We've got an emergency. We've got, transformation that has to happen. How do we do it?
Yes. Yep. And you mentioned also, which is a great thing, you're bringing people from different parts of the business, which is avoiding the silo. And I also, what I also learned from doing this exercise is that all of a sudden different groups discover that they might be dealing with the same monsters. And so when I hear another business unit dealing with the same monster, first of all, I feel relieved that this is not just my problem. The second piece, I'm in an environment where the business is investing that, is going to help me solve those problems.
Yeah. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's the other thing is often another department has solved the problem for themselves, but because there's no communication about it, because people don't think it's related, you miss out. And so even just being able to say best practices, look what we can do, that line of communication becomes open when we do these creative activities, that even just, it creates those relationships between people that didn't exist before. And that offers the opportunity for collaboration.
Yep. From your observation, what's your insight? What is it a personality trait that some people, when you go to a business setting, that they jump on the idea? Is it knowledge? Is it, people with a high level of curiosity? What is it that makes people jump at the idea?
Of what we're doing, you mean?
Yes.
That's a good question. I don't know. I do think that different personality approach this stuff differently. And I think we work really hard to recognize that diversity, neurodiversity, emotional diversity, like that stuff is all important to recognize and value. And when we bring our stuff to the table, it's so different that it levels the playing field in many ways. And what I like is that it can take the shy person and allow them to participate in a way that they might not know usually, and the confident person to feel less confident. And so they can't quite take control like they might normally do. And so it changes the dynamic. And we also very specifically set up structures to make sure that the maybe the more self-identified introverted people can have an opportunity to speak because they often have great things to say, but are just kind of, they're at the escalator waiting to get on the stairs and they keep moving and they're like, I can't get on the stairs. I think of a kid, trying to do that. And so, we really take that intention around that of saying, let's all stop. Let's all write. Now let's discuss. And we have everyone to call on because everyone's written, and so we can sort of bring into voices we haven't heard from. And so I think we do a pretty good job of addressing that piece of it, where maybe there are some people who are way more game. There's just people who are more game. I get it. I wanted to sit in front of the classroom and, because I always want to learn. And there's kids who want to sit in the back because they're like, hey, if I can get away with it. Right. And we have that as adults.
Of course.
And so I think we try to address those tendencies, because neither of them are necessarily correct or better. It's just, we've been allowed to get away with whatever. And so we're there to help you learn. And, I think we use ourselves as examples of how people who are self-identified as creative can benefit from it. So we've got the whole range. If you're completely identified as non-creative, you're good. And if you are creative and identify as creative, you're good too.
Yes. Hi there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more podcasts, check us out at theinnergameofchange.com.au. And you mentioned something really interesting, that when you bring something new to the group, everybody becomes at the same level, because the competent people and the high flyers will become similar to the people who are actually a little bit behind. The extroverts will be the same level as the introverts, because there's something curious and something novel that they haven't really seen before. Do you notice that?
Oh, 100%. And we love that.
Yes.
We really, we like that experience. It gives a lot of opportunity for learning. And again, when we do these creative activities, when we do this reflection, we'll often say, look, the activity we did isn't the outcome. That was just a process that gave you an opportunity to observe your behavior, but also the other behaviors in the room with you. When we do that, and especially with leadership, that allows people to see, like, I may not be the norm in my organization or my department, my team. And if I've been assuming that everyone has the same way of thinking that I do, that's problematic, because that may be hindering my ability to lead properly and my ability to create the change we need. And so that kind of discovery is really great with this process too, because again, no one is going to be an expert at what we're doing. When we bring these activities to people, everyone's like, I can't draw, or I can't do that. No one feels good about it, which is like, not no one, but there are some activities where everyone is uncomfortable, and that's great, because in the end, what we're doing has a very low risk factor in terms of, like, ultimately the outcome of whatever we do. There's no grade. There's no
performance management
penalty. There's no performance review. It doesn't matter. So as long as you try, you're going to get learning from it. If you don't try, now that's a different problem. That's an organizational issue, right? If you're just not trying anymore, that means that there's some major problem that has to be addressed that we can't ultimately do as coming in there teaching about creativity.
Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed, and I actually have been to a creative session, but it wasn't really part of work. It was more of friends. And I discover always during those sessions is that I'm okay to sit in a risk zone, which is I'm okay to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And because errors come as part and parcel of a creative process.
Yeah, and you're definitely in the more smaller percentage of people who are comfortable with that. And I think, again, organizationally, cultures tend to say that's not good stuff. So we prioritize the people who, that we want certainty, we want clarity, and we want definitive answers.
Failure is not an option.
Yeah. And so that's a problem, right? Because creativity is often built on happy accidents. We were talking about that separately earlier, but the Bob Ross thing. I mean, if you can't have that in your organization, then you have essentially legislated out the opportunity for innovation in your organization, right? And so you've created a culture where it can't happen unless you just have luck that some random person's willing to sort of fight back against it.
Yeah, there are no mistakes. I can't mimic his voice, but there are no mistakes. There are only happy accidents.
It says it so calmly. It feels so good when you watch Bob Ross paint.
Well, he's an influencer. One of the things that you mentioned before is when we get to this creative outcome, how would people feel? I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of dopamine, a lot of, feel good. What's your observation?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, because we're teaching this as a practice and we're doing it iteratively, what we are teach a bunch of sort of principles around creativity. And one of them is dream small. And this idea is that everyone's being told to dream big, solve these huge problems, do this big work, whatever it is. And it's overwhelming and daunting. And we really can shut down. But also a lot of work just takes a long time. And when we don't celebrate our successes with regularity, you wait till the project's over and it's been a year, however many months, many years. You don't even get to it because you're on to 12 other projects and then it just sort of all rolls together. And what we do is create this very quick loop where you can make something, and when you've completed it, it feels good. And then you celebrate that success, which makes you incentivized to do it again because you're like, I like that. I got that endorphin rush. Let's do it again. Or I check that box. I love it. Box checking. Ooh, it feels so good. Right. And so I could do that on a daily basis and create a habit around this that makes me want to do more of it. And so that we know really works. I've interviewed over 1,000 people who've done some form of daily creative practice myself. And consistently what we've seen is that about a week to 10 days in, people see transformation happen. So if you commit to the process and believe it works because you've seen, the results, you stick with it. 7 days, 10 days in, you've celebrated your success. So you're willing to keep going. You got positive feedback, so you keep going and do these little incremental stuff. Then you can see real transformation. And it's so amazing. People are just blown away by what comes back to them. It's exponentially more than what they put into it. And then it just keeps growing the longer you go and the more you put into it. And so that process requires, that you get a good response to it, because otherwise, if you're just like, I'm terrible, I can't do it, I can't, all that negative thinking, and you don't get that support, who's going to continue? And then you won't get to the good ideas. Because another thing about the numbers is when we do workshops, we'll often have people iterate 30, 50, 100 times something. And consistently, what we saw is at the halfway mark or 3/4 mark is when they got an innovative idea, which means if you're doing 30 of something, that's 15 or more. If you're doing 100, that's 50 or more. That's a lot.
Yes.
But guaranteed the first 5 are the ideas everybody's had. It's consistent, easy. It's the stuff that's obvious. It's stuff you've already solved that way. And when you get past those and then you keep going to where it's almost uncomfortable, then you start putting wacky stuff out there. But one of those is going to be the like, wow, who'd ever thought to do that? Boom. Now you've got an exciting idea. But by doing it fast enough and celebrating each one and not critiquing and being negative about it, you can force that process along. Our brain wants that.
Yes. What I like about your approach, and actually, by the way, you talking about dream small, I really like that, which is sort of counterintuitive to everything we've been told, dream big.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading a book now called Think Small, which is about behavioral economics, and that nudges are more important than big steps. And after 52 years on this earth, I've learned a couple of things, and one of them is just start small, and it will
just
grow.
Start, right? Just do anything, and get some movement forward. And
now that doing, what I like about your approach is that it's all well and good to say, well, I'm not a good artist, and the idea is that once you start doing the stuff, it's actually it changes the dynamics in your brain. Is that I'm actually doing it. What do they say? They say it's far more effective to act your way into a new mode of thinking. So that acting is really important rather than thinking only, saying I can't do it. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, we talk to people all the time because I think people they sort of think themselves out of stuff. Oh, I can't think of a good idea, or I don't know how to do that, so I'm not even going to try doing that. And that's why when we do this work, we're having people jump into uncomfortable situations and start right away. And we give them minimal direction. They start doing, and then they don't like it. But afterwards, when they reflect on it, they're like, wow, once I just got started, and then things happened. And we're like, exactly. That's what we want you to learn that by doing, because now you're going to believe it and you're going to apply it to other work you have to do. And you're going to be more likely to start. But yeah, the only way you get better at something is to do it over and over. But if you don't do it once, then you're never going to do it the second time or third time either.
Of course. Yes, of course. And doing it the first time or a second time will get you temporarily out of your comfort zone, but then you'll create a larger comfort zone later because you've already done it.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Do you work with different industries, and which industries do you think are more open to your kind of business?
We do. We work with a pretty wide range, but I have to say, we really love working with the folks that would not be typically identified as creative organizations, like financial institutions, engineering,
legal.
I think I mentioned before, legal folks. Yeah, absolutely. Work tax accountants and stuff. Groups like that, they've been told they're not creative often. They've been told they couldn't be creative sometimes because it's inappropriate for them to be. But all of those industries recognize that like things are changing so fast that they will be replaced by apps if they're not looking out. So there's going to be a startup that's going to replace what they do. And so they've got to be on top of this change and can't be complacent either, even if they're an industry that's remained the same for a long time. And I like those groups because they've generally not considered any of this. They're if they've got great leadership who's open to it, and usually that's why they're bringing us in, because somebody believes in what we're doing and understands its value. It's just amazing because because then you've got the change is so much greater, from people who are not necessarily doubting, but people who just don't feel like it's for them, to people who leave the space going, wow, I can do this. That's pretty profound. But yeah, so they're not, that isn't even a challenge. It's just like a fun space to be in because people are just having a great time being like, wow, I didn't even know we could do stuff like this at work.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that what you're trying to do, what were you doing once you land in a corporate setting is that internally the leaders, these are a message the leaders are sending to their own teams that we are okay for you to think in a different way. And we trust you that you're going to come with different ways to manage problems. And that's an invitation to be comfortable that when mistakes happen, there's going to be a rather high level of tolerance towards it because we know it's part of the creative process.
Yeah, it's what we point to if we do have sometimes groups who are kind of a little like, what is this or why this is happening? We're saying your leadership wants you to do this, right? That's why I'm here. That's why this is happening, which means that they're okay with this. They want you to prioritize this. And it's just so new for people.
Yeah.
In many cases, this is, maybe the first time that they're, really trying to implement something like this across the board. And yeah, so there can be some deer in the headlight moments where people are just like, wow, this is just so unusual.
Well, I'm a big believer in these power in uncertainty because that's where creativity happens, and it is uncomfortable. However, you can only move forward through uncomfortable situations, and that's where learning happens.
Yes.
If I am a business leader, what would be your message to me? I'm meeting you for the first time, and then you're talking to me about your value proposition.
What would be, again, I don't think we ever get brought into a room where there aren't people who have already gotten excited about what we're doing. Like, I don't think we're ever sort of starting from scratch. And I think that's important because I don't think I can convince you that this is important if you really, truly don't have any interest in it as a lead. As if you're an organizational leader and you're like, I'm considering, tell us why we should bring you in. I think people are coming to us specifically because they've already realized everything we've done before doesn't work. Our employees are the best. They're all A-type personalities. They're all super successful and they're struggling. And we know that there's something else. There's something missing.
Yes.
And so that's really what we provide, is that missing piece, this thing that is all within us that hasn't been developed in so many people. And when you see like an artist come in and say, look, I am constantly innovative. It's my job to be a consistent innovator. And I've got tool set for doing that. And it's a transferable set of skills and you can learn it.
Yes.
That sounds exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Taking the first step, a stakeholder taking the first step is important. They need already to be warm to the idea. So so we can have a discussion rather than you trying to convince them.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to have to be like, I mean, I've done it. I think it was people who are already on the page, but I've had people maybe be like kind of interested, but say, yeah, but isn't this stuff really just like the cherry on top, like, the creative special sauce you add later? And I said, no. This was at a meeting one time where I did this, and I left the meeting like, oh, I made a big mistake, but turned out it didn't, because it turned into a relationship I've had for years with an organization. But it started with me basically pushing back against someone who was kind of like, yeah, but this creativity stuff is the bonus. And I said, no, this is an essential ingredient. This is the sugar or the flour in your cake, where if you don't have it, you don't have a cake. Because we've been baking cakes without this thing and wondering why they're rock hard or wondering why they don't taste good. And that's why, like, you can't add it later. This has to be part of it. This has to be an ingredient. And so when I talked about it that way and why it's so important, they came around, which was cool. But they were on board to begin with to some degree.
Yes. Yeah. I work in the business of change management and practice and communication. I run workshops myself and help collaborate around the change, create less uncertainty. What would be your message? Because I think we can learn a lot from your approach and also the ideas that you've shared with us today. What would be your message to people like myself when we go and work with our clients?
I think maybe just thinking about what every individual in that room is bringing to the table, that, they have an opportunity to participate in this process, but they have to be reminded of their capacity to do so.
Sure.
And so I think when we show them, and that's again why I like doing creative work. And you talked about before, and I'm going to diverge a little here, but about how it creates these new sort of patterns in your brain when you're doing this work. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but yes. What we do often is physical, tangible work. And so much of work at this point is mental, cerebral, typing. And, unless you're in a very specific industry, so much of it is done that way now. And obviously, even now with virtual stuff, we're even doing less of a tangible world. And we really double down on the tangible in many ways, just physical activities, drawing, making things with your hands. And that's a different way of thinking. And so that shows you these other paths and other opportunities. And so I think when we're working with people around change, giving them these other tool sets, these other ways of approaching the things so that it's not the same problem they've always had. You use the word counterintuitive, and I use that a lot with creativity. It is not the way work works. Creativity is its own very different thing. And we can't just sort of take the regular work thing and do it this way. We have to do this other stuff. And I think it's the same thing. If you're presenting change as this potentially scary, potentially massive thing,
yeah.
How do we get people comfortable with it? Well, it's doing small things that allow them to believe that this is valuable and it works, and then building up. And so that process that we use around that small iterative transformation fits very well with this.
I can only imagine that if I am not creative and I can't do what you do, because that's your expertise, I can also think of partnering up with a creative person to help with that. So that can be another avenue.
We love collaborating. I mean, we advocate collaboration in the work we do, but we love collaborating with other consultants because, we have our area expertise. We want to be great at what we do. And so that's why we focus on it, and we don't offer every service under the sun. And so, when we work with other folks whose challenge is to do this other thing, and then we can prime the people that are walking into that room to be. So I just did this, an executive MBA program where there's different components taught, and I teach creativity, and they put me at the beginning because we were priming all the students now to be ready for everything that comes after. And if you've got people being more open-minded, thinking differently, being more willing to take these creative risks and do things iteratively, the next task they're given, they're going to approach it with that mindset. So it's great.
Yeah, fantastic. We are coming to the end of the podcast. I thoroughly am enjoying this conversation, Noah. I want to loop back to the VUCA. So the A stands for ambiguity.
Thank you. It kills me that I can't remember. I know the phrase, but then I always get stuck on some of the words in it.
And my friend, you certainly have removed a lot of ambiguity about creativity and the inherent power of sitting in the discomfort. Because that's where learning and creativity happens. And when that happens, everybody wins.
Absolutely.
So now, how would people and listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, you can check us out at anotherlimitedrebellion.com. That's our organization. And if you want to see my own artwork, noahscalin.com is the place to check that out. And we have information on both sites about the work that we do as consultants as well.
Great. And now we're going to put all the details in the podcast details and our website as well. It's been a pleasure having you, Noah. I really appreciate your time, and I hope to have you at some stage, because you did mention something around perfectionism, which is in art, there is no perfectionism. So maybe in the future, I really want to tackle that, because there is a lot of perfectionism drive in the workplace, and your type of work can really help sort of calm it down and balance it as well. But until then, it's been a pleasure having you, Noah, in the Inner Game.
It's been great talking to you.
Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Inner Game of Change podcast. To know more about our guests and this episode, check out the innergameofchange.com.au website. And remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you the next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.